There you go. Okay, so the Torah portion for this Shabbat is Pekudei, which means the accountings of, and these are the accountings of the Mishkan, translated here, the records of it, but it means the records, meaning everybody takes an accounting and then puts it in an accounting record. So this is the last Torah portion in the book of Shmot, the book of Exodus. When it's not a leap year, it's read together with the previous Torah portion. Vayakel, Pekudei are combined as one reading for one Shabbat, but because we have a leap year this year, we had extra Shabbatot, and we were able to let some of the Torah readings breathe a little bit. So Pekudei gets its own reading, and it's also, well, we'll get to there in a second. So it's a short reading. Vayakel last week was also a short reading, and it's a repetitious reading. It reviews a lot of the same stuff that we've heard already in the past, except this is like confirmation. This is now the stamping of official accomplishment of everything that was planned, everything that was proposed, everything that people struggled so hard. And we, Jen is sewing as we speak. All the sewing, all the weaving, all the hammering, all the sewing, all the schlepping, all the everything, all of that unbelievable communal cooperation has been concluded, and then all the pieces have to be put together. So that's what happens, and then everything is accounted for as, all of the contributions. We know where everything went. We know where all the gold was spent. We know where all the wood was used. Everything was used properly. So there's a lesson that our tradition emphasizes, that accountability is important. Transparency in the use of public funds is required. And this is what we have here in our Torah reading throughout the parshan, and the process of then putting everything together. Moses is credited with putting all the pieces together. And of course, in the imagination of the tradition, he's like Superman. He's like moving over here and pulling this together and pushing this over here, like single-handed, because he's the only one who's mentioned in the Torah. Everybody has produced all of this stuff, but now he puts it together. So, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that he had helpers and that he directed it, but in the imagination of the tradition, he's doing the whole thing. He's putting all of the pieces together, and he's installing all of the things in their proper place, and he make sure it's all exactly according to plan. And then at the end of our Torah reading, we have the verse right before Maftir. So it's very short, so I'm gonna read it anyway, even though it's not part of our Haftarah, but still. Verse 33. 571 is where it is in the Torah, in the Eitz Chaim. This is Exodus chapter 40. If anybody has the text there, we can start from 33 till the end of the Torah portion. So who's going to read that? Geraldine, you got your hand up. Thank you.
And he set up the enclosure around the tabernacle and the altar, and put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure. When Moses had finished the work, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it, and the presence of the Lord filled the tabernacle. When the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their various journeys. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. For over the tabernacle, a cloud of the Lord rested by day, and fire would appear in it by night, in the view of all the house of Israel throughout their journeys.
Right, and then we say chazak, chazak, benit chazek. May we be stronger and stronger, and let each of us strengthen the other. We just finished another book of the Torah. So that's the conclusion, the dramatic and very inspirational conclusion. It's a success. It works. Like you pull the switch, and yes, the lights all go on. Right, God's presence works. It comes into the tabernacle. So that's the end of the Torah reading and the end of the book of Exodus. So when we think about beginnings and endings, the beginning of the book of Exodus is also an accounting, right? These are the names of the 12 sons of Jacob who came down to Egypt, each with their family, and they come down to Egypt. They are enslaved in Egypt, and now the end of the book is an accounting of what we accomplished, this holy space which is ours and ours alone, and we are free to move, and we are moving along with God's guidance. We're not going down to Egypt because of a famine, because of the force of circumstance. We're heading home to the promised land with God's presence to lead the way. So that's the bookends of the book of Exodus. All right. This Haftarah that we're about to look at is a Haftarah which actually isn't read all that much, because either we read a combined Torah reading and then we have a different Haftarah to read, or this would be Shabbat Zachor. So sometimes that gets that preempts the Torah reading, the Haftarah reading. Next week is going to be the reading for us for Shabbat Zachor. But anyway, this Haftarah doesn't get that much play, but it's part again of a bigger story. It begins on page 580, and it's the very end of chapter 7 in the first book of Kings, and then the first 21 verses of chapter 8 in the first book of Kings. The king is Solomon, Shlomo, and where we are now is a number of chapters that have been devoted to the building, not of the tabernacle, but of the first temple. So there's no point in my asking you, what's the connection between the Haftarah and the Torah reading? So I just gave it away. That's the basic idea. And the readings are, if you look at for Vayakel, it's earlier in chapter 7, and later in chapter 7. So this whole set of chapters in the book of Kings is utilized as the set of Haftarot, the prophetic readings, for these Torah readings that have to do with the tabernacle. And now we're dealing with the temple in Jerusalem built by Solomon and all of the workers and the allies that he brought to bear to fit, to fulfill this gigantic project. Okay, this is also part of this is read also on Sukkot, because it's also it takes place on Sukkot. So that's another time when this reading happens. So let's take a look at it. This is, as I say, 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 51, and then going into chapter 8. Okay, Geraldine, are you on for it?
Sure.
Thank you.
When all the work that King Solomon had done in the house of the Lord was completed, Solomon brought in the sacred donations of his father David, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and deposited them in the treasury of the house of the Lord. Then Solomon convoked the
Okay,
elders.
so let's stop here. So I said the general connection with our Torah reading. How about specific connections? What's the specific link between our Torah reading and this opening of the Haftarah? So hint, I we broke practice and we read the end of the Torah reading, the Torah portion, just a minute ago. Right?
Well, it's when it's completed.
Yeah, it's the idea of the completion. We've reached the completion, a long process that has been completed. So let's take a look just again back to that verse 33 on page 571. Okay,
Yeah.
and the beginning of it is that Moses does the final point is creating the outside enclosure for the courtyard. So it starts, everything is built from the middle out, right? And so you put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure. And then the end of verse 33 is, you see it, Geraldine?
And he put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure.
Keep going.
When Moses had finished the work.
That's the end of verse 33. So in the Hebrew, see, they have me and the translators don't always see eye to eye. I don't know if you've noticed. But the translators have, clearly decided that the end of the paragraph is in the middle of the verse. And then they start the next paragraph with the last part of this verse. And they put, when Moses had finished the work, then the cloud, blah, blah, blah. So, and that's a legitimate way of reading this, in terms of Englishifying the text, but you could read it in a much more clunky way, which is the way I prefer. I prefer clunky. And that is that when you read the verse, it says like this, and this is a style that continues throughout the entire Torah portion and throughout the Torah itself. So the beginning of verse 3 is, and here the translation is actually very nice, and he set up the enclosure, vayakem et echatzer, right? He set up the enclosure and put up the screen, and he put up the screen. And then the last phrase, I would have preferred that they translated, and Moses finished the work, period. That's the end of the sentence. And it's not part of the maftir. The maftir starts with the next sentence, right? When we read this on Shabbat, we're going to not, when we read the concluding, maftir reading, we're not going to include that Vayechal Moshe part. So now in the Hebrew, it's Vayechal Moshe et hamalacha, and Moses finished the work. Our Haftarah goes Vatishlam kol hamalacha asher asa hamelech Shlomo beit Hashem. Right. So when, and again, here they have the when. I wouldn't put in a when. I would say, and all of the work that King Solomon did for the house of the Lord was finished. That's all. Vatishlam, and it was finished. They like to put in the whens because then they like to link it to the next phrases, right? Okay, so we have their conclusion again. So here's a clear link between our Torah reading and the Haftarah. And in a certain sense, there's a nice kind of sense of the Torah reading ends with the report of completion. The Haftarah begins with the report of completion. There are two different words, though, that are used for finished. right? When all the work that had been done, or when Moses finished the work, the Hebrew word in the Torah reading is vayechal. The Hebrew word in the Haftarah as vatishlam. So the Hebrew word in the Torah reading, vayechal, should echo another place where a similar word is used. And here's the hint. If we make Kiddush on Friday night, we say this word. So Sarita's nodding her head.
Hashemayim, right?
Right,
Right.
right. So when we make Kiddush Friday night, we say Vayechulu Hashamayim v'haaretz v'chol tzvaam vayechal Elokim bayom hashvi'i. There's that word, right? So the word Vayechal is to complete, and that creation story, which proceeds, day after day after day, and then it says, and then God completed everything. All of the work of heaven and earth were completed, and God finished doing everything that God wanted to do. And then, of course, God is very happy, and God blesses and sanctifies that concluding period called Shabbat. So for the Torah reading, the use of that Vayechal is very important. And there are other echoes. We don't have time. We've done it other years, if I recall, to see different echoes in the Torah reading itself that shows the parallelism between God creates the world and then concludes and feels satisfied with this, and the Jewish people create another world, the sacred world of the tabernacle, as a kind of a sacred microcosm. So this is the way that the Torah reading, in many literary elements, tries to recall that. When we go to the Haftarah, our first word isn't Vatechal, let's say, right? Vatechal kol hamlacha. All of the work was concluded. Instead, it's Vatishlam. So Vatishlam is a different word. What means completed, but it should echo in another way. What words would the word Vatishlam echo for us?
Shalom.
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 Right? Okay, shalom is peace. Shalom is wholeness. Shalom is completion. Shalom is well-being. And who is the person who's credited with finishing this up? Shlomo.
Shlomo.
King Solomon, yeah.
King Solomon doesn't help us in English. In Hebrew, Shlomo means his peace.
Right.
Shalom, shalom. King Solomon is named after Shalom. So therefore, here we have a different kind of echoing. Vatishlam kol hamlacha, all of the work was kind of Solomonized. Not solemnized, but it was all taken care of by Solomon. It was completed by this Shlomo, Shalom guy named Solomon. Okay.
So isn't there sort of a different motivation? I mean, the Mishkan, God, this is what God wants to happen, that the Mishkan be built and gives detailed instructions, what have you. But having a king and have the king, I mean, Shlomo decides, right? So that, for one thing, there wasn't originally going to be a bunch of kings. So that was, people wanted that. And the temple also, this was something that people wanted, right? So if it's not harking back, with the Mishkan harking back to using the same verb as creation, because this is what God wanted to create, to build, right? And this is, so I'm wondering if that's one reason for the different verb, is one is sort of what God's desire, what God wanted, and this was more people driven.
So it's not a dichotomy that's so strong, because first of all, it's the people's demand for a king that creates the kingship, but the temple is considered the further fulfillment of God's wish. God says, I'm going to find a place. When you finally get to the promised land, you're going to find a place that will be the place that I choose. So this is all seen as fulfilling God's hopes and plans for the future. And we have the mention here of David, that Solomon is following off from David's career. He is the chosen heir. We've talked, we actually looked at Haftarah about the struggle to make sure that it was Solomon that was going to be David's successor. But the chapters before these chapters, and going back into the end of 2 Samuel, are all about God communicating to David and saying, David wants to say, hey, it's time for us, we're settled down finally. It's time for the tabernacle, which has been this, wandering shrine. It's time for the tabernacle to settle down the way we've settled down. And it's time to fulfill God's promise that there will be one central place that will be the focus for the entire unified Jewish people. So David wants to build the temple, and God doesn't let him. And God says to David, even though you want to, and that's very praiseworthy, you're not going to do it, but your son will. Your son will be the one to build the temple that I want. So it's not that this is like coming out of the popular will without any of this background going on. What's it called? Public Works project actually stems from this sense of, and in your notes, the notes in the Eitz Chaim point this out, the sense of real transition. A new period has now dawned for the Jewish people. The way that the Torah talks about it, at the end, there's a cloud that comes and fills up the tabernacle, and then the function of that cloud turns into a guiding GPS for the Jewish people to wander around. But now we're in the Holy Land. We're not supposed to wander around anymore. So now we're here, and there's no need for that tabernacle to be portable. There's no need to have a shrine that you can take apart and that's lightweight, and each piece is a little piece. So Solomon's temple actually is much bigger than the tabernacle itself. It follows the same structural plan, but it's all blown up to be much, much more grandiose. And of course, it's made out of stone and it's rooted in the ground. It's a building. It's not a tent. We're going to get to the rest of it in the Haftarah. This transition, this actual physical change from the tabernacle to the temple itself. That's a major part of what this is about. But it's reflecting also the people's understanding that they have gone to another stage in life. They're not anymore wandering around. They've actually finally succeeded in establishing all of the accoutrements of a legitimate country. And it's time for them to have their temple be something to be proud of and as well. And that's what Solomon has accomplished. So that's part of the difference, right? And therefore, yes, it's Vatishlam, it's Solomon, first of all, because Solomon himself was a contentious figure. We had all the fights before about who should be it. He's right. He's the guy that's supposed to do it. And that's all, now Yasher Koach, to Shlomo for pulling this off. But if we read the rest of what it says here, here's where David comes in, right? That, Geraldine, you there? Read from the middle of that sentence. Solomon brought in. Sentence 51, verse 51, that paragraph there, that's chapter 7.
Okay. When all the work King Solomon had done in the house of the Lord was completed, Solomon brought in the sacred donations of his father David, the silver, the gold, and the vessels, and deposited them in the treasury of the house of the Lord.
Right. So here's this acknowledgement that there's been a whole bunch of preparation that predated Solomon's career. David already, his father, had prepared all kinds of stuff for the sake of using it for a temple, but they've been waiting around. So there's an interesting note that we have on this verse. Look down in the commentary, please.
Rabbinic tradition was troubled by the plain sense of this passage, which notes the enrichment of the temple treasures through David's donations. Several interpretations highlight Solomon's ethical integrity in refusing to use David's wealth in the actual building of his temple. According to one view, David should have used this money to buy food for the hungry during the famine in his day. Since he did not, his money was tainted. That's Rashi's interpretation. Another opinion stressed that because David's gain was ill-gotten, Solomon deferred his building project for years until he could finance it on his own.
Okay, why was it ill-gotten? Because it was acquired through war. And we have in the book of Chronicles that God says the reason that David will not be able to build a temple is because he is, contrary to his son Solomon's name, he's not a man of peace. He's not a man of shalom, because your hands drip blood. They've shed blood. So therefore, you're not the person who's going to build a house for God. So Shlomo does. So this is both acknowledging David's prior intentions, but subtly also saying, well, then this is not going to be a vanity project. This is not going to be me building this for my sake or for the sake of my father, but rather the building itself will have to be done through public donations, through everybody wanting to make this building happen, through everybody working for it, the same way like we have it in the Torah reading, right? And then meanwhile, there's all this royal treasure. We'll put that into the treasury, right? There's, every once in a while, if the electric bill hasn't gotten paid, it's always tough to get operating expenses covered by donations. So we'll have a little endowment, so to speak. Okay, so that's the point there. Okay, now we have chapter 8.
Then Solomon convoked the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes and the ancestral chieftains of the Israelites, before King Solomon in Jerusalem, to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord from the city of David, that is Zion.
Okay, just one little note, the word convoked in Hebrew, az yakhel, and that's the previous Torah reading, vayakhel and Pekudei, the convocation, bring everybody together to get this done. Okay, so now the Ark of God, that's left over from the tabernacle. That was built by all of the work that was done in the wilderness, and that's been the most sacred item of the tabernacle, and it's been deposited in the city of Zion, which was like the core of what became an expanded city called Jerusalem. So the city of David, and now it's going to be brought in, right? And installed in the new temple building. Go ahead.
All the men of Israel gathered before King Solomon at the feast in the month of
Itanim.
That is the 7th month.
Okay, the feast with a capital F, that's Sukkot. So that's what Hechag. That's what the Torah calls the holiday of Sukkot, the main Chag, because it's in the 7th month, the month of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, we get ready, and then full moon on the 7th month, that's when we have the festival, right? This is Sukkot. So this is when this is happening. Okay.
When all the elders of Israel had come, the priests lifted the ark and carried up the ark of the Lord. Then the priests and the Levites brought the tent of meeting and all the holy vessels that were in the tent. Meanwhile, King Solomon and the whole community of Israel who were assembled with him before the ark were sacrificing sheep and oxen in such abundance that they could not be numbered or counted. The priests brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place underneath the wings of the cherubim in the shrine of the house in the Holy of Holies. For the cherubim had their wings spread out over the place of the ark, so that the cherubim shielded the ark and its poles from above. The poles projected so that the ends of the poles were visible in the sanctuary in front of the shrine, but they could not be seen outside, and there they remain to this day. There was nothing inside the ark but the two tablets of stone, which Moses placed there at Horeb, when the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after their departure from the land of Egypt.
Okay, so here we have this dramatic bringing in of the Holy Ark and placing it now in this building. It's never been in a building before, right? And it's now installed in the chamber, which becomes the new Holy of Holies in the temple in Jerusalem. And we have it being carried. It says that this is being carried by both priests and Levites. Are they taking turns? It's not clear. Usually, it's the Levites who carried the ark, but here we have the priests pitching in because this is a special transport. In general, until this moment, every time the ark was transported, it was transported for the sake of finding some new temporary home, or it was transported to help the Israelites fight a battle. It was transported into war. So it was never being transported into a new safe and sound home. This is now meant to be its final station, right? This is supposed to be its place forever, okay? Of course, we know historically that didn't happen. But there it is. So the priests are also involved in bringing it and escorting the ark into the room. And then we have this description about putting it underneath the wings of the cherubim. So how does that sound to you? How do you picture that? Can you imagine that happening? What exactly does that sound like is being done?
First in and less inch. Don't use
Jen.
So I actually was confused on that. So it's not the cherubim that were already on the ark that had been, like, we're talking about something else. They make new cherubim, or
Right.
are they just having a vision here? I
Right.
saw the movie and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and there were two cherubim protecting them, you know.
Right. So there's nothing to argue about then. We now know exactly what happened. So this is a question, right? It sounds from the description here that the winged cherubim are a separate entity that are in place already, and then they put the ark underneath these winged cherubim. That's what it sounds like, right? But traditional commentators don't see it that way. The traditional commentators see the cover of the ark with the cherubim as part of the ark. It's a cover. It's part of the ark. It's not a separate entity. However, the way you would read it is that when they transported it, they transported them as two separate pieces, maybe because they had to, get it into the building, and they didn't want to break the wings. They didn't want to. This is a complicated, piece of stuff. It's not exactly a simple, moving job to get it through the door and all that kind of stuff. So the wings, then the winged cherubim, the cover is taken by one group. The ark, the box, is taken by the other group, and then the box is put there underneath the winged cherubim. However, one major biblical scholar who I've learned a lot from, he really insists that what we have here is a separate set of cherubim. These cherubim are these big cherubim that are kind of like, in the ancient Near East, you get these, sometimes on reliefs you see them and so on, these winged, half animal, half this, half that kind of thing. The Torah tells us that they were kind of like human forms, not animal forms, but nevertheless, he insists that they were these big things. And then the ark, which was built for a tabernacle, which was transportable, it was smaller in many, many, many ways, but it was a lot, and it actually fit underneath these big, gigantic, monumental sculptures.
Wait, so then we have 4 cherubim, the 2 that were on the
So
cover,
actually, if you look
and
back
these
in the-
2 more.
Yeah, if you look in the Torah
And these
reading,
sound different, don't they? Because the original 2, right? I never think of them as having these wings out so much,
well,
Um,
they're wings like this. They're wings that come over like this.
mhm.
Like here's one cherub, the wings go here. Here's the other cherub, the wings go here, so that they create a
Right.
dome.
Right, but this
of
sounds
space
more
underneath.
like, I don't know, encompassing kind of what's
So
being described
he
here.
sees it that way, right?
Yeah.
He actually sees it that way. And of course, we don't know, unless we take the movie, as the final arbiter, we really don't know.
Uh,
But
Wait a minute. We got away with the original cherubim on the ark because God said
wait.
so.
Right, no, but guess
How are we
what?
getting away with these? Like
Read
that whole
read last week's Torah reading, and you'll see that the cherubim are a motif, and the sculptured cherubim are on the cover of the ark. But cherubim are used on the curtain as well.
Okay, so what we're talking about, and this scholar is talking about, is a relief and like an icon, not an actual like statue.
No, he thinks it's a statue.
So how do we get away with the second pair of statues if it's not directly commanded to God? Like, don't worry about
How
that
did we
one
get away with,
mitzvah.
what a little bit of what was mentioned before, Sarita was bringing it up, who's deciding what's what here? The answer is that earlier, God conveys to David how to keep the essence of the tabernacle's plan, but at the same time change it for the sake of a building. So the simple answer would be, that's part of what God authorized. Here is his imagining, and then the ark fits in here. In fact, he claims that the whole tent fits in there, that the whole tabernacle fits in there.
So these 2 cherubim weren't facing each other because the original 2 cherubim were facing each other and creating a space between them.
So that's the ark cover part, and
Yeah.
this is a doubling of the cherubim, right, in sculptural form. And the doubling of the cherubim in a motif has already been done in the Torah, and now it becomes a sculpture as well. Yeah, that's what he says. Go no. I don't know. Then we have the business about the carrying poles. I talked about them last week, and then I continued talking about that this week, with regard to the ark and creating. And again, nothing in the Torah tells us to do this. Creating this illusion, so to speak, this image of the curtain is not falling flat, but it's got 2 bulges that were created by making these carrying poles not removed, which was done for everything else. They were kept here and then extended to push outward, but not to be seen. Just the bulging was seen. Yeah, Jen.
So that's what I was actually thinking about just now, like all whatever we did with reliefs or actual sculptures or the beautiful sculptures or scary sculptures, depending on the ark itself. No one gets to see this except God and the high priest. That's it.
That's right.
Like, so we just kind of know it's there and that's cool and
Very
everybody's
much so.
satisfied.
Yes, that's like a really important thing to take in. That this, and maybe that's another reason, again, why we have this endless repetition of all the description. We have a textual description of all of this that we read every year, that we can read anytime we want. But in the experience of the people, none of this was actually visible to them. It was maybe visible at this moment because this was like this, public, consecration. The Talmud says that at the pilgrimage festivals, the curtain was pulled aside so that people could get a glimpse, but they were still far away. They were in the courtyard or beyond, but that they could just somehow, somebody could say, yes, I did see it. I was able to see. And what they were supposed to be seeing was the two cherubs on the cover of the ark. And the way the legend has it in the Talmud, embracing each other, hugging each other, to show how much God and Israel love each other. So again, that's not in the Torah. It's this elaboration of this, set of mysterious elements that trigger feelings of awe and curiosity, both. Look at what it says here in verse 9. Let's read that again.
There was nothing inside the ark but the 2 tablets of stone, which Moshe placed there at Horeb when the Lord made a covenant with the Israelites after their departure from the land of Mitzrayim.
Okay, so here we have again a description. Nobody sees this, right? Nobody is allowed to peek inside the ark, but this is a description. Guess what? The ark is empty of anything except what Moses put in, right? The 2 tablets of stone. Okay. There's so many different questions that could be asked about this. One question is that later on, as the Israelites go wandering through the desert, we get to a very tragic story of challenging Moses and Aaron's authority by Korach, right, and his followers. And Aaron's authority as priest is affirmed by a special miracle, right? His staff is placed inside the tabernacle along with the other staffs by the other tribes and the other family units, whatever it is, clan heads. And his staff becomes miraculously an almond tree, right? So it blossoms and it has almonds and so on. And then the Torah says explicitly that this staff, almond tree, was placed inside the ark. So now we're being told that there's nothing in the ark except the tablets.
But also, what about the original tablets?
So that it never says in the Torah that the broken tablets were put in the ark. That's also a midrash, and maybe that's part of what's referred to here. If you wanted to, the 2 tablets, both versions of the 2 tablets, you could see it that way, maybe. But yeah, it doesn't quite say that. But there is an explicit mention in the Torah that there's supposed to be this miraculous rod that turned into a what do you call it? An almond tree. What happened to it? So I would suggest that what happened to it was that another incident happened that disqualified it from being kept in the ark. When toward the end of their lives, Aaron and Moses are again challenged. It's right after Miriam dies, and there's no water to drink. And Moses and Aaron go, and they stand before this rock. And God says, take the rod that you did the miracles with and go then by the rock and speak, and the waters will flow. And what does Moses do? Unfortunately, he hits the rock with the stick. So if we understand that that stick is the stick that was Aaron's stick that turned into an almond tree, then it no longer has that miraculous association, because now that miraculous association is contaminated or polluted by the association of it being the time of Moses and Aaron's downfall, right? This is why they're not going to go into the land of Israel, because so that the rod disappears. It's not there anymore. It's not in the ark to be preserved. Okay, verse 10, let's go.
When the priests came out of the sanctuary, for the cloud had filled the house of the Lord, the priests were not able to remain and perform the service because of the cloud, for the presence of the Lord filled the house of the Lord.
Okay, so yes, Sarita's nodding her head. She knows exactly what I'm about to say.
Well, that's because that's the cloud. That was the same thing as with the ark. Yeah.
Right, so here we have again a repetition in a specific detail, right? The same result, right? And this is what confirms that all of the questions that we have, what do you mean? How could they make those extra cherubs? Or what happened with the ark? Why isn't this exactly the same thing as before? Who says that these changes are okay, right? All of the questions that anybody who would be thoughtful and thinking about change would be asking themselves are answered by this divine manifestation. The point of this divine manifestation is twofold. In the Torah reading, first of all, it says you did right. You did beautifully. Thank you. You gave me the home that I have always been asking for, says God. And God comes to dwell inside the house. And God's cloud of glory is manifest. It's palpably there. And also now we say, number one, yes, it worked. And what you did was right. Everything that you've tried to do has been exactly agreed to and accepted by God. Yasher koach. Right? Go ahead.
Then Solomon declared, "The Lord has chosen to abide in a thick cloud. I have now built for you a stately house, a place where you may dwell forever."
Okay, so that's an interesting set of phrases, right? The word lishkon, that's like mishkan, to dwell, right? God has spoken and said that God's desire is to dwell. You might think that what Solomon should say is, and God has said that my desire is to dwell in a house that I built. But that's not quite what he says. I've built a house for God that's going to be God's permanent address. Never will God ever have to wander around again. But nevertheless, he acknowledges that the true dwelling of God is in mystery, right? In a thick cloud that you can't see through. And that cloud, of course, is both a representation of God. Now, hey, look, the cloud of God is in the sanctuary. It's in the temple. So God is really there. But on the other hand, God's not the cloud. Right? So the cloud both reveals and also conceals, right? And indicates that whatever it is that we have in front of us is not the ultimate reality, but some signal toward a different reality, right?
But
Later
it's
on,
still-
yeah.
No, I was just thinking that it's not God, but it still in some ways gives some sort of a tangible realization that God is there. Which is
Absolutely.
one of the things we grapple with now is how do we know, right? There's nothing that gives us that. But here, you couldn't see God, but there was still something that let you know that God was present.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole point of a tabernacle is we need something tangible, right? We're not just meditating. We needed to, to be physically real for us. Okay, we need to stop, but let's go through one more verse. 14.
Then, with the whole congregation of Israel standing, the king faced about and blessed the whole congregation of Israel.
Okay, and whatever he said, you'll have to read that on your own. But so we have these words of blessing from Solomon. Question, any other connections with our Torah reading? The answer is yes. So if we look back at page 568, we have chapter 39 in Exodus, the next to last chapter. And Geraldine, you got it?
Yes.
Verse 42, please. Bottom of the page.
Just as the Lord had commanded Moses, so the Israelites had done all the work. And when Moses saw that they had performed all the tasks as the Lord had commanded, so they had done, Moses blessed them.
Amen.
Amen.
All right, so that's it. Thank you, Yeshua.
Hi, everyone.
Hi,
you.
everyone.